He called Jiang a bastard and told him that he knew he had lied to him. He gave the order to his subordinates to catch the girl. With a serious look, Jiang simply started looking at him and remained silent. Upon seeing the man with blue hair, the girl's expression changed drastically. She began to look at him and couldn't help but panic and be terrified at the same time. She explained to Jiang that he had already taken everything that the Luo family owned. After saying this, she asked the man why he wanted to kill her so badly. He started looking at the girl and calmly asked if he really needed a reason. Upon hearing that she belonged to the Luo family, Jiang turned his head towards her and began to stare at her intently with a serious look. Jiang and the girl were on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, while the man with blue hair and his subordinates were on the first floor. She clenched her fist with one hand, extended the other to the side, started staring at the man and told him that if he killed her, then the Luo family would never forgive him. She also added that they would never let him live in peace. Jiang, who was standing behind her, simply dropped his arms to his sides and just kept watching the man. Upon hearing this, the man with blue hair couldn't help but burst into laughter. He asked her if she truly believed that a family like the Luo family was capable of doing this. At that moment, his subordinates began to look at the girl and couldn't help but smile. While he had one hand on his waist, he lowered his head, put the other hand over his face, and couldn't help but laugh at the thought that a second-rate family with a little money really took themselves seriously. He revealed to the girl that without the protection of the Zhao family ancestors 100 years ago, the Luo family would have been annihilated long ago. Upon hearing this, one of his subordinates unsheathed his sword and the others started laughing. Jiang Tai crossed his arms, stared at Jiang intently, and couldn't help but smile. After saying this, he removed his hand from his face, lifted his head, and with a serious look, he told her that in the eyes of the Zhao family, they were no different from humble peasants. He also added that for him, they were just cattle that the Zhao family could slaughter. Upon hearing this, Jiang turned his head towards him, and with a look filled with hatred, began to stare at him intently. He couldn't help but become enraged. He couldn't believe that a person could be so arrogant. The man extended his hand forward and his palm started emitting a powerful red energy which began to rise towards the sky. Then, he looked at the girl and with a smile asked her what could the Zhao family investigate if there was nothing to find. Several seconds later, the energy he had released began to create a powerful barrier around the abandoned warehouse. This ability was called the Dragon Prison Formation of the Zhao family. The girl looked up at the sky, placed a hand on her chest, clenched her fist, and couldn't help but be astonished and panic, as she now didn't know how she was going to escape from here. Jiang lifted his head and upon seeing the barrier, he couldn't help but be amazed. To him, the man with blue hair was someone very interesting. While Jiang and the girl were standing on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, Jiang Tai unsheathed his sword, started staring at the girl, and prepared to attack. He asked the others to listen carefully to the young master and not leave anyone alive. The others responded with an understood. The man with blue hair, who was standing next to Jiang Tai, simply remained silent. Several seconds later, Jiang Tai prepared to attack, but at that moment, the man with blue hair stood in front of him and put his hand up to indicate for him to stop. Then, he began staring at Jiang and with a smile told him that the girl from the Lu family must die today. He remained interested in Jiang as he was fully aware that he possessed the divine rank creation class. After saying this, while he was still looking at Jiang, he explained to Jiang Tai that the creation class called Spiritual Master was a very rare profession. He wasn't like other people who didn't know what it was. Then, he reached out his hand to the side and with a smile decided to give Jiang the opportunity to obtain everything under the sky today. He extended his hand towards Jiang and gave him the order to capture the girl, in exchange for sparing his life so that he could serve the Zhao family. After saying this, he asked Jiang what he thought. Upon hearing this, the girl who had her hands on her waist couldn't help but be shocked. On the other hand, Jiang dropped his arms to his sides and remained silent for several seconds. Jiang began to look down at the ground and couldn't help but smile and praise him. As the bastards of the Zhao family were really good at making, the girl turned her head towards him, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but panic, wondering if Jiang was really going to accept his proposal. With a murderous look, Jiang stared at the man with blue hair and rejected his offer, mocking him by telling him that the Zhao family could go to hell. After saying this, he tightly clenched his fists, and while his body was releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine, with a serious look he told him that he refused. He also asked him if he could come for him if he was looking for a fight. The girl turned her body towards Jiang, brought her hands close to her chest, and upon seeing that his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, she couldn't help but take a few steps back and become terrified. She began to wonder what was happening. Upon hearing that Jiang had rejected his proposal, the man with blue hair couldn't help but become enraged as this was a dishonor to him. He gave the order to his subordinates to finish him off. Upon hearing the order, they unsheathed their swords, gained momentum, took a big leap and began advancing quickly towards Jiang. While in midair, Zhang Tai started looking at him and asked the others to be careful as Jiang wasn't easy. While little by little they were getting closer, Jiang simply stayed silently observing them without making any movement. Several seconds later, they approached the second floor and Zhang Tai, upon seeing that Jiang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, revealed to the others that he could use poison and advised them not to attack directly. Upon seeing that they were ready to attack, the girl hid behind Jiang. At that moment, Jiang deactivated the poisonous mist, extended his hand towards them, and while his body was surrounded by a green energy, he began to stare at Zhang Tai with a serious look and revealed to him that not only could he use poison but also the talent ability of his. Upon seeing this, the girl took several steps back, placed her hand on her chest, turned her head towards Jiang, and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused as she didn't know what this power was. In the blink of an eye, several green spiritual roots began to emerge from the ground. Zhang Tai approached Jiang, grabbed the sword with both hands and prepared to attack. But at that moment, he looked down at the ground and upon seeing the spiritual roots, he was shocked and couldn't help but wonder what this ability was. The spiritual roots grew enormous and in an instant, they entangled around Zhang Tai's and the others' bodies, rendering them immobile. They panicked as they didn't know what was happening. Jiang, who had his hand extended towards them, revealed that his ability was the evolution of all things. Little by little, the spiritual roots began to tighten Jiang Tai's body. He quickly grabbed the roots with his hands and started looking at Jiang, unable to help but wonder what was happening. Seeing how strong the roots were, he realized that his class was of divine rank. He was also confused because he remembered that Jiang could use poison as well. He decided not to stand idly by, unsheathed his sword, held it with both hands, and used all his strength to cut the roots around his body into pieces. Upon seeing this, the others also began doing the same as him. He advised them to attack the roots since they were very fragile. The spiritual roots began to fall to the ground near the man with blue hair, who started to push them away using his hands. He didn't take long to realize what was happening. With a surprised look, he shouted and called Zhang Tai an idiot, explaining that this was just a distraction. He also added that Jiang was ready to attack. Jiang took advantage of Zhang Tai and the others being distracted to release the insects, which began to look at them with a penetrating gaze. While his body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he reached out his hand to the side, stared at him intently, and explained that it was already too late. The girl sat on the floor, resting her hand on it, lifted her head, and upon seeing the insects, she was surprised. While Zhang Tai's subordinates were busy cutting the roots, the insects began to approach them. He turned his head to one side and upon seeing the insects, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but sweat and be shocked, wondering what these things were. The insects began to move at a high speed and started attacking them. Jiang Tai blocked the attack using his sword, but unfortunately for him, the insects were so strong that in a matter of seconds, they destroyed his sword. Upon seeing this, he was in shock, unable to believe that Jiang had actually destroyed his weapon. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't poisonous mist at all, but rather summoned monsters. At that moment, an insect began to approach him from behind, and it prepared to attack. He lifted his head, and upon seeing this he was surprised. He started screaming and revealed to the others that this poisonous mist actually came from the monsters. He came to the conclusion that he couldn't dodge the attack. Jiang, who had his hand extended towards him and was controlling the insect, began to look at him with a murderous gaze, and couldn't help but smile as he had finally caught him. Just before the insect could attack Jiang Tai, someone approached him and put their foot on his shoulder, called him trash, and asked him get lost. He turned his head to the side, and upon seeing this, he became somewhat confused. Upon seeing this, Jiang also became somewhat confused and amazed at the same time. This person was none other than the man with blue hair. He unsheathed his sword, grabbed it with one hand, gained momentum, took a big leap, and as he slowly advanced towards Jiang, he used the first form of Kang Ning's 9 forms. By doing this, his body began to emit an orange aura. While Jiang's body was surrounded by little Nian's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. The girl who was sitting on the ground next to him put her hand in front of her mouth and became terrified. Jiang lifted his head towards him, and upon seeing that he was faster than the poisonous mist, he couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly in sweat. He used the secret technique of the Zhao family called chasing dragons. At that moment, a dragon made of spiritual energy manifested itself and began to stare at Jiang. It clenched its teeth tightly and attacked him. Its attack was so powerful that it destroyed the area where Jiang was into pieces and created a smoke screen in the process. While with one hand he was holding the sword and had it extended towards Jiang, he began to stare at him fixedly and with a smile called him a bastard. He knew it was going to be difficult to deal with him. But luckily, his level wasn't very high and his speed wasn't fast enough. He thought that by using this blade alone he would be able to defeat him. But to his surprise, several seconds later, once the smoke cleared, his expression changed drastically. He was in shock as he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Luckily, Jiang was still alive thanks to the girl using her hidden profession ability called Earth Eternal Shield and creating a shield around them. While she had her hands extended towards the shield, it began to crack. She closed her eyes, and while blood was coming out of her mouth, she explained to Jiang that she was in a lot of pain. Jiang, who was standing behind her, began to look at her with a surprised and dumbfounded expression. He realized that she was actually a defensive type. The man with blue hair had forgotten about her, but now seeing that she had blocked his attack using the shield, he couldn't help but become enraged. He started looking at her aggressively, clenched his teeth tightly, and prepared to attack again. Jiang began to look at him and thought that this was a good opportunity to attack. He extended his hand to one side, releasing the poisonous mist. Several seconds later, he landed on the ground. At that moment, several insects began to approach him quickly from behind. One of his subordinates, who was lying on the ground, reached out towards him and caught his attention to ask him to be careful. While holding the sword with one hand, he turned his head back, and upon seeing the insects approaching quickly, he became alert. At that moment, he grabbed one of his subordinates by the hood. Upon seeing this, the subordinate became somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. While with one hand he was holding the sword, with the other he grabbed his subordinate by the hood and placed him in front of himself to use him as a shield. Since the insects were not very smart, they attacked his subordinate instead of him. The insect's attack was so powerful that their bodies were thrown backwards. His subordinate was seriously injured. While his body lay beside him, he placed a knee on the ground, leaned the sword against the ground, rested his arm on the other knee, and began to look down at the ground and cough. Jiang came down from the second floor, started approaching him, and couldn't help but think that he was a nasty bastard for using one of his own men to block the attack. The insect's attack pierced the man's chest, who was lying on the ground. Even though he was badly injured and bleeding from his mouth, he was still alive. He began to cough and caught his master's attention. He stood up, started approaching Jiang, slightly turned his head towards his subordinate, and thanked him for enduring the attack for him. He thought that he had not educated him in vain, and upon seeing that he was still alive, he couldn't help but praise him and think that he was truly strong. Jiang, who was standing in front of him, simply remained silent. He took out a dragon yuan pill from his pocket with his hand, opened his mouth and ate it. He couldn't believe that he was being forced to use the dragon yuan pill. In a matter of seconds, his subordinate lost his life. He began to approach Jiang, dragging the sword on the ground, causing small rocks to slowly float. Upon seeing this, Jiang assumed an offensive stance while on the other side. The girl sitting next to him and covering the wound on her arm with her hand remained still. He tightly gripped the sword, pointing it towards Jiang, and with a murderous look, he warned that his next attack would slice his head into pieces. Jiang simply remained calmly looking at the man in silence, ready to face any attack. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,